Hi, everyone. I'm Chow, CTO and founder of Mobolize. So before we get started, let's take a quick poll. By show of hands, how many people in here are running Android? All right, great. Quite a few of you. I'll assume everybody else here is running iOS. No offense to BlackBerry and Windows folks. So by another quick show of hands, how many people have heard of stage fright? A lot less of us. OK. So the thing that's interesting about stage fright is it's an interesting class of malware. And I wanted to show you how quickly and easily it can affect your device. Can we play the video, please? So what you're going to see here is MMS being sent to a device where the MMS doesn't even actually have to be opened for the attack to occur. It can take place completely in the background, where it acquires root within seconds. It can actually delete itself so that the user actually doesn't know that they've even been hacked and rooted and compromised. So of the folks that just raised their hands running Android, I suspect some of you actually may have already been owned by stage fright. So why does this occur? Fundamentally, the class of vulnerabilities that when we look at, for example, Android, these classes of vulnerabilities require the systems to be patched for them to be closed. It's not so simple to have an Android device in particular to be resolved and addressed and patched. It can take years, and in some cases, in most of these devices, the vulnerabilities never get patched. I was actually at a session yesterday where a speaker from Verizon talked about how 99.9% of all the exploited devices out there occurred due to unpatched vulnerabilities. So here are some examples, a long history of major vulnerabilities hacking to Android, and as recently as this month, Wi-Fi bugs inside of Qualcomm and Broadcom Wi-Fi chips. You can be at a Wi-Fi hotspot. Someone can send you Wi-Fi packets on that hotspot, and you will be hacked. And the fundamental reason why this keeps happening over and over again, across the years here you see, is that new software, new features keep coming out. And when you develop new software, guess what happens? You have new vulnerabilities. In fact, 2015 was the highest level of vulnerabilities in the history of Android, more than the last 5 years combined. It's not just Android. iOS is a victim as well. 2015 was also the highest year of vulnerabilities for iOS ever. So let's talk about the attack surface on mobile. The fundamental thing about what Android, Google, and iOS, Apple have done is they've done an excellent job protecting the App Store. So applications now as a source of malware is actually quite low. And there's other cases where there's applications, security applications out there that also will protect against malware in the form of email attachments and file downloads. The problem is that it's not the downloads that's the problem. It's actually all the other ways into your device. So your device actually has quite a wide attack surface. Emails and MMS, I can send you an email link to a stage fright URL. And again, within seconds, your device could be hacked. There's also the case of phishing and other web-based attacks. Folks that are using the browser on their mobile device, how easy is it to see the URL on there? Well, if you can't see the URL, it's really difficult to know that you're actually being phished. And, well, I'm not quite sure what happened. Yeah,
Hopefully
unfortunately, back is not working. So the other forms of access into the network consists of other network interfaces, and perhaps the most important network interface is Wi-Fi. So when you're on a Wi-Fi device, that's taking probably about 50, in some cases 70% of your traffic. So Wi-Fi is perhaps the most interesting place that attacks take place. And you may actually be joined to a Wi-Fi network right now that actually may not be the real Wi-Fi network you expect to be joined. Your your packets right now in your login sessions may be hijacked by somebody else in that same Wi-Fi network. So how do we address this issue? Fundamentally, going forward, we need to protect the entire perimeter of the device, all of the ways that data can get in and out of your device. And one of the important things about how we're going to deal with this problem going forward is let's take a history lesson from the PC era. Because if we don't know our history, we're doomed to repeat it. We need faster patching on the devices. Apple's working on that quite well. Google's going to eventually bring that to the market. But unfortunately, that still takes months. What we need are real applications, real security applications that protect against all the different ways data can get in and out of your device. And once we have those real security applications that can protect the entire perimeter, we can empower users to protect themselves. Don't need to rely on the devices, the OSs, and the networks to do that for us because they're not doing it. Thank you.
Before we get into the discussion, just a reminder that if you have questions for the panel today, or comments or observations or disagreements even with what the panel said, please do send a tweet. I've got an additional iPad here because one just isn't enough. So if you tweet MWC16 for security, I'll get your questions here and I'll pose them to the panel. So to get us started, gentlemen, we heard perspectives there about the ever-increasing attack surfaces, be it on mobile, but also as an enterprise business. You've got so many different ports of entry and so many different partners that you have to work with as a company that opens up the environment in which you can get attacked through. What do you think is going to be the solution to this? Is this a case of we just have to learn from history, as Will said, and have to realize that there's some fundamental building blocks that need to be put in place? But it seems throughout history that security is always a bit of an afterthought in these things. The sort of desire for new features and new market movements comes first. Unless that security threat is visible at the start, people tend to skip forward, and then we have to deal with it in retrospect. So do you see that changing? And what can people within businesses do to convince their product development guys and their business teams that security needs to be taken more seriously? Dave, maybe I can start with you with that question.
It's fascinating, isn't it? I think that realistically at the moment we have to see cyber attacks as a cost of doing business in the digital world, and they're not going to go away overnight. There's nothing about our economy that's going to suddenly change, so startups building new products are going to invest really heavily in security early on. I mean, they've just got too many challenges, so people are going to keep building insecure stuff. And as Will was explaining, even the people that are pretty good at this, and Google and Apple are pretty good, are still having some pretty torrid times. From my perspective, I think some of the secure building blocks that Will was talking about will help. We are seeing massive progress in biometrics and secure sensors and that allow you to verify your identity, which Anand was talking about a little bit. But I still think we have to fundamentally assume that problems are going to occur, and we've got to have a way of finding out that that's happened without having a visit from the government or discovering only at the point at which the bad guys have published all your data online. And just like Will was saying about speeding up the rate at which we're doing security and patching, we need to speed up the rate at which we're discovering problems and trying to head them off before they become a crisis. And I think quite a lot of security is, I'll build it, it will feel secure, and then I'll just wait until something happens. And I think we need a more active investment and approach into finding the bad stuff.
Continuous monitoring, continuous and more intelligent tools that can actually tell us when there's a problem occurring. But does anything need to happen earlier in the cycle? It seems some of the things we hear about, particularly in the commercial sector, you always with the benefit of hindsight, you can say, well, wasn't that an obvious problem? And when we talk to a lot of people out there doing network security, they say, look, the guys inventing the technology just aren't thinking security in the design phase. So is it really just a monitoring case, or do we need to do more in the design phase? Will, you're nodding?
Yeah, I think that we need the entire ecosystem to help here. I mean, security is such a massive problem. Right now, I think the reliance on the OS developer, the reliance on the cellular network operator, it's not enough. I mean, what we need is to allow the entire ecosystem, the entire industry to help participate here. And one of the problems right now we have today is that these platforms are not open in a way that embraces other parties in the industry to help participate and improve security. If we look back in the PC days, Windows, for example, specifically developed API hooks to enable third parties to jump in there and develop very creative security solutions. That's, iOS is a great example of extremely closed, and even Android is extremely closed. It's both a good and bad thing, and I think if we really want to solve security, we have to enable other folks in the ecosystem to really help close these holes.
Anand, would you agree with that?
I agree with both of you, but I want to add a bit more to it. I mentioned a bit, if you look at and I am a mobile communications guy and working on security for that for a long time. So if you look at the whole network, the way it is changing, it used to be a walled garden kind of. From security perspective as well, it is even today from security perspective, it is a walled garden. The way it is changing now is that you are getting all the virtualization and you are having services on top using APIs. So just think, the APIs are giving access to things deep inside the operator network, which is the critical infrastructure. So now going to what you're asking, we'll have to secure down there in the code till the level where people can come in. The attack surface is amazingly bigger now with that. Now, how do you do that? I'm also a standards person. I'm product person, standard person, business person as well. So now, how do you do that? You can standardize ways to secure. So you can standardize segregation. So how different things in virtualized world can work for at least mobile applications. Further, what Dave briefly mentioned that I talked about authentication, you can take that to next level. What's the security of certain parts of signaling, or let me put it differently, certain parts of signals cannot have security. You have to start the system somehow, and then you make it secure further on with all the signals getting secured. But there are means today to secure all these things from the very beginning. You go out some of the booths and they have amazing solutions. So from standards perspective, we can come up with solutions from early on to secure these messages even from the first step onwards. So that's a quick response. There are many more things behind that.
Okay, so a lot to do there. Eddie, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, so I think what you're referring to as well from the very start, concept that we've heard, secure by design, which I have extended to secure by default, which is not just design, because it's design you think about one system, but by default you have systems working together at being able to enforce security policies and rules around how a data is treated and how it's protected. And a system is only secure as it is the weakest link. So when we talk about securing these systems, we have to do it at the operating system layer, at the application layers, from the back end to the consumer devices. So it's about securing each of those pieces. I mean, if you only focus on one, you're only going to protect that area. The data is flowing very quickly from one place to another, and it needs to be secure across the entire life cycle and path. So it does require, as you said, being a little bit more proactive. Today, security does seem to lag behind the technology, and also the security is also lagging behind the bad actors. So it needs to be moved to the forefront.
So how do we change that environment then? Because if you think about it, today we're living in an extremely exciting time. For most things we want to create now as human beings, most ideas we have around, certainly digital services, the technology already exists. So we're in a very different time where throughout most of our history on this planet, we've been waiting for a technology to come along that sort of drives the next wave. So now you can dream up most ideas, and you see lots of them here this week. Stick a sensor on this, do this, connect these things together, new service. And when we run things like hackathons and so on, we see brilliant ideas coming out. But if you ask the guys developing these, what about security? It's very much still, in my experience at least, an afterthought. Well, we'll worry about that later. We've got to get some cash in the door, and then we'll worry about that. That's at the innovation frontier, but even in big businesses, you can imagine that times 100. So is that an education problem? Is it our mindset problem about security? It seems if you've got just to have a security expert who comes in, like the policeman, that's probably not the right approach. Thoughts on that?
It needs to be but as an enabler of business. So organizations see security as enablers of business, being able to work with data sets that maybe they couldn't before if it was not secure. So once it becomes something as a driver of innovation and business enabler versus a police that's stopping the technology, then that's when really organizations will put it more to the forefront.
I think people need to show that they care, though, right? So you're wearing a smartwatch right there, a first-generation smartwatch. Like, what security decision-making did you go through when you bought that? And I bet it connects to your work email and all that stuff. You know, like, we all care, and probably everyone who's bothered to come to the session today cares because they're interested in the topic. But there are 86,000 people here at Mobile World Congress, and there aren't 86,000 people in this room. Like, people really get motivated about working faster on the newest stuff. I think it will be really hard to shift consumer and procurement mindsets to security first. And only when that happens is there going to be pressure on people building smart TVs and smart printers to put the security in from the outset.
Yeah. And do you think consumers care as much about security? I was reading an article just the other day about a study of millennials that they're just not bothered. It's not just this sense of, well, they're young and they don't have so much to lose, as you might put it, but they don't adopt the right security practices. They don't do sort of two-stage authentication, even on things like Gmail. And having a kid who's one of those kids, it just doesn't even enter their minds, right? And you can sort of, as a parent or whatever, try and impress on them. But I think as a community in general, we're seeing a generation coming up that just doesn't seem too concerned about security. They're growing up in an environment where they're very public anyway, so the kind of privacy angle isn't there. I don't know, maybe when they get older and they have some money to lose or something, it might change. But do you think there's an education problem with the users as well, who for many companies are the biggest threat to their own business because they're not taking the security?
Nick, I want to twist your discussion question a bit, actually. Let me put a couple of points. One thing about education, certainly that should be there. But the network can also do much more. That was something I was proposing as a potential means of revenue for our whole value chain. Not only the kids using, as we are moving forward, we are seeing, of course, the devices using it, but 5G, as is being said, should go deeper in the society. Mm-hmm. Yeah? So you have people who are not even educated using communication systems and internet even more. Yeah? And how do you secure all of that? You can have the network, mobile networks, or all the networks, which can be intelligent enough to provide proper security for those situations based on the requirements there. You can have what your solutions are there. You can check the behavior and then understand what attacks are happening and control the situation. So, for example, you can send a message to the base station to take some action, or the MME, or sorry, I should not use those words, but the core network, and then you can change the encryption algorithm, for example. So the network as well can support in taking action quite a lot.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well,
go on, Will.
So no one wants to be educated about security, right? No one wants to worry about it. And that doesn't mean that it isn't a problem. I mean, I'm sure all the thousands of people out there that are participating in a botnet don't realize that they're actually participating in a botnet.
Yeah.
They're not aware of it. You can't expect consumers to be aware of it. But that doesn't mean as an industry that we can't do a lot more. When we talk about designing in security from the beginning, those are great things, and we have to have those. We need more encryption. We need more security capabilities built into these devices. But it's not the 90% case that we're worried about. The major holes are covered. All it takes is one opening for someone to get in, and suddenly, if as soon as that tiny little opening that just couldn't, or someone even at Google or Apple didn't recognize, and it occurs. And even today, a lot of the attacks are just the same old buffer overflow attacks that have always been hitting us. They'll keep happening. So what I think we need is a lot more people in the industry to help fix this problem for the consumers. Don't make the consumers do the work. Allow us, those here in this conference to be able to contribute to that.
I agree with that statement. You know, you were talking about millennials and younger generations. I think they just expect that smarter people have already thought about security and they've already solved it. They expect, well, you know, large companies, they make huge revenues. They should have all these security engineers that are already doing this stuff, and it should be secure for them already. As we know here in the industry, that is not always the case, but that's what a lot of young people would expect. And corporations should make that more of a differentiator. I mean, we've seen Google, you know, add two-factor authentication. They've changed from you can no longer receive email if it's not over a secure connection. Before you could. By some point, probably two-factor is going to be default as well for Gmail and not allowed by password. And corporations are going to continue this, and that's where it needs to be, like you said, in the industry. It's for us, I mean, it's a huge differentiator. As Apache is open source, anyone can download it and install Hadoop, but actually it's not secure. You need to go to an enterprise distribution like ours, and for us it's a big differentiator. So the security and controls to be able to make it enterprise ready, to be able to pass like most of the stringent regulations around security and privacy. So I think it's on the industry to be able to make those decisions smartly for the consumers and be proactive about it.
I think I can add something. I would like to add something, sorry, Nick. In terms of the industry as a whole doing, I just want to tell everyone, activities are happening in mobile communication world in this side. We understand that mobile systems are being made with certain level of security, and quite secure actually, as you said, more than 90% fine. But we understand implementation issues can also happen. And that's why we are doing activities in which we are coming up with testing of devices. GSMA is setting up the whole architecture for that, how to do the process, and 3GPP is setting up the requirements that should be at least tested, minimum testing should be done. Yeah.
So who do we think is going to control the business of security? Because there's a business and product side here. I mean, you're all in the business of security products. As we go into more and more industries becoming digitalized, and they're shifting essentially a lot of their IT burden onto other companies, mobile companies, companies like Google, many others. They're getting away from having to be the expert in that. Now, on one hand, you can say, if you were Google, you would say, this is great, we have the best security people, you don't have to worry about that anymore, we'll take care of the security. But is that a viable way forward? Do companies need to have their own chief security officer in the future? Is it something you just say, I hand it to this company here, do I hand it to Darktrace? I mean, how do I approach that if I'm an enterprise out there just wanting to do business in the digital world?
Yeah, if I may take that, because he's looking at me. The answer would be just look at me and it will be taken care of. But it's a very open question. I don't know how the industry will move. But to design security, you always need to have the business perspective. You have to have all the users perspective. You have the design perspective or architecture perspective, everything. Then you come to security solution. Or as we move ahead from doing security and pushing all the architecture and business according to it. Now, whether an enterprise or any company should do it and have the CSO, I would say guaranteed yes, because then there's at least someone who is understanding the security needs and has some control on the top to get the budget to get security done. Now, that said, it doesn't mean that the company itself should do everything. You cannot have all the expertise by yourself. It's impossible. And I am working with operators. Some of them want to do things together by themselves, but then together with others. Some of them want to give it completely outside to others. Both the models work. But you have to have minimum someone in there who understands your needs to move things ahead.
So do you think the mobile operator can clearly take care of the network layer, and I think we're agreed that they should, but can they provide that as a broader service across the delivery of that digital service? And Will?
No, there's no way. Security folks, the way we describe problems around security is defining boundaries and perimeters, right? And the notion of a cryptographic boundary that protects a particular crypto module. If you extend that to the notion of what all the elements in the mobile ecosystem looks like, you've got a perimeter around the server side, and that's where Eddie and his company help protect the data that resides at rest on these large data sets. And then you've got the operators participating in between that and the mobile devices. And then you've got the boundary around the mobile device. So when you look at these discrete perimeters or components in that ecosystem, what you find is that there's different solutions for protecting each one of those different perimeters. And operators protect that middle section, but that's really the extent that they can protect. For example, operators can't protect the mobile device when they move on to other access networks. That's not part of their cellular network. When you're a system operating a server protected by Cloudera's security software, well, what about the data that's not sitting on somebody else that's sitting on a different system that has different security characteristics? So because there's so many different perimeters out there, there really needs to be different solutions for each area. And the device side, for example, where my company plays, that side is, as I described earlier, has a number of different solutions that are completely unrelated and different than what you would put in the network and what you would put on the server side. But each area has really a strong need for different folks to bring solutions to each one of those.
So is that for the enterprise customer, they've got to worry about that themselves? They've got to have a chief security officer or equivalent, and that's just life? Or is it a case that there's going to be increasing responsibility on others?
Unfortunately, if you don't have one, then you could be that company who had that one server opening and they come in and all your emails revealed. So you don't want to be that company. You want to be that company that hired that security officer.
You can't give away the risk. You can give away activities and people participating in your security operations, but still at the end of the day, even if everything is very cleverly secure, if someone turns up and suggests they're going to hit one of your employees with a spanner until they give them the data that they want, well, those people are legitimately allowed to access that data, and that risk can never be gotten rid of. There is always going to be innate risk, and you have to weigh some of that stuff up. But I think there is, and particularly for this audience, some genuinely interesting opportunities to allow people to opt into a more secure space. So we've talked a lot about operators. There isn't yet an operator, as far as I'm aware, and I have looked, where you can say, you know what, I get that the internet shouldn't be controlled, and you should be able to opt into the full internet if you want to. But I'd also, for my home, I'd like the choice of an internet service from my operator where you can never talk to known malware domains or botnets or the configure infrastructure, or my phone never receives a stage fright message, just simply says you got a message from Will, we think it was bad, but you might want to ring him, or something like that. I mean, why is it still completely okay for that stuff to get to my front door and then the full onus need to be on me? I'd love to see some operators not mandate and force, but have an option of, I guess, what we in the industry often call clean feeds, because for most businesses and most households, you don't want to be exposed to that stuff, and why would you?
We have worked on that. There are legal requirements that stop things.
Well, sure, but progress could be made, and if the consumer is opting into it,
Sure.
Operators have some really smart people in it. The BTs, Telstras, Verizons, T-Mobiles, etc. They're good at security. Why can't I have a share of that pie? Maybe I pay some more money to subsidize their team, but I would, in my house, with the internet that my kids use and stuff like that, I'd like a clean feed.
Well, that opt-in, though, has to be extremely trivial, right? I mean, consumers and even enterprises don't want to have to, quote-unquote, opt into all sorts of different things, because then we're talking about hundreds and thousands or thousands of decisions you have to make about your security. You don't know where all the holes are. You can't know. So, the secure by default is great, assuming that the people who control the defaults covered all of the holes, and they don't. And the operator can't prevent me from sending you an email with a stage fright URL in it. And even though you know me, if you probably got an email from me with a URL in it, I'd suggest you not click on it. But how would you know otherwise? And so the opt-in here should be something that is, perhaps much more coarse-grained than just, I want to allow certain specific things. No one wants to run down a long checklist of security parameters to change. So they want to be able to opt into large, like, I want to be completely locked down or not. And those kinds of tools should be out there to have security officers or even individuals make that decision.
And I would argue that not only do organizations need the chief security officer, they're going to need new skill sets from that chief security officer. Like I mentioned previously, they need to be aware of data and privacy rules now. They need to know about ethical treatment of data. Maybe a new role in the organization, but initially it's probably going to be the chief security officer that needs to understand these and understand the data sets, more of the business. They need to understand it's not just a technical back-end IT person. It needs to be someone that understands the business, what type of data sets does the business work with, and what are the most important data sets and the regulations and laws around them. So not only do they need them, they need someone with experience in those areas.
So I'm hearing out of everything you've said that there's many different pieces in play. There's education, be it at the individual or the retrained chief security officer or a broader role, as you were mentioning, Eddie, in the business. But that mobile operators probably could do more or potentially look at products in the area, but it's not going to be the silver bullet. It's not going to solve every problem. So it remains everybody's individual and individual enterprise problem to attack. We're just almost out of time, so I'd like to just come to some closing thoughts. What I'd like to hear from each of you is, what do you think are the most important 2 or 3 things that must happen in the industry over the next 3 years in terms of security? We're here next year, what would you like to see dramatic progress on as an industry in the area of security? Well, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think that I see the devices where the greatest needs are, because I think on the server side in the network, there are large entities with big piles of cash ready to throw at solving those problems. So operators and server and web content side, they've got that covered. On the device side, in the end, the consumers, in many cases on their own, they purchase a device, they're in control of that device, and when you hope and rely on Google or Apple to close all the holes for you, or the operator to be able to close the holes for you, that's not gonna cut it. Unfortunately, we're still seeing attacks taking place and getting around these barriers that are put up. I think the device is probably where I see a lot of innovation happening. We're going to see Google bring out direct patching of systems to the device as well, having to get routed through an operator. But again, as I talked about earlier, that's not going to be fast enough. The response time, the velocity for these changes is really, really increasing, right? So I think Anand had a slide that's like 50 years pressed down to just 5. That's only going to accelerate. So changes on the device will keep coming, and we want them. We want the next Marshmallow or the next iOS 10, but with those we'll get new vulnerabilities. So how do we close the hole so that we can respond to security vulnerabilities in days, not months, not years? And I think the device is where we're going to do that. Thanks, Will. Eddie?
So one term that we haven't really thrown around here, and is one that I think that we expect in the future, is the lines are really going to blur of what is a mobile device. I mean, when we're talking about the Internet of Everything, and are you going to use your phone to use two-factor authentication to change maybe the temperature on your thermostat? When you go into your car, and are you going to use two-factor there to set the radio stations? All of these things are going to start to get all connected together, and security and privacy is going to be even more paramount when we have every single data set, from your thermostat to your refrigerator to your phone to your car, all these data sets together. It's really going to require much more security and privacy than what we can do today. I mean, even just in the protocols that are being created for these devices, there's still no one unique standard for how do you secure it, how do you authenticate these devices, how do you exchange secure data. So that's where I see a lot of the area of focus, where we really have an opportunity, because we're still early in a lot of these technology areas, that we need to do these things about secure by design, secure by default, because it's just so massive, the amount of things are going to connect together in those environments, and the lines are going to blur. I mean, is your tennis shoe a mobile device or not? It's just hard to imagine how we're going to protect all these data sets.
Okay, thank you, Eddie. Dave?
I'd really like to see operators and service providers and the big tech companies give feedback to their customers. And what I mean by that is, if you're an operator and you can see that a household is significantly participating in botnets, or businesses are, or if you're Apple and you see that there have been 10,000 guesses of my iCloud password, why not tell the consumer so that at least they can think about it or be aware of it? If someone told me my iCloud account was being attacked, I'd go and create a really long password and put up with the inconvenience. And we know people use terrible passwords and do terrible security behaviors, but no one ever tells them personally, hey, what you're doing here is a bad idea, or someone's pwned your broadband router and you should go and wipe it or get a new one. And I think there's a lot of really clever people in the industry sitting on knowledge, but it never goes back to the people that are actually participating in attacks or are affected.
Okay, thank you. Anand?
Nick, you said 3 things, but I have too many things. But let me collapse them down to 3. First thing, and let's really not forget, baseline security. Yeah, we all have been talking about two-factor authentication and things like that. I put them all in baseline security. We have to take care of that, and we have to be better in that as we move ahead. I can tell you about horrific things over there. And in that baseline also comes your hardware, your OS, and the basic protocol stacks, that's like TCP/IP. And then if you have application, then taking care of the application secure development, and if it has to be accessed, then how it is being accessed. Yeah, that's baseline security for me. As we move ahead, I hope that happens properly. It keeps on going bad all the time. Second point, we have to see that people start understanding that security is important for business, yeah, and that security can drive business. So that's where we can. Once we have that kind of mindset, then the whole community as a whole of mobile communications will move differently. So there are 2 points over there, as I mentioned. Is one of them I put as network guardian, but there's a lot of things in there, including forensics. But starting with steps like assurance, yeah? You do the testing of the devices itself, be it whatever devices, and you do the pen tests and stuff like that. With that, you start moving towards a network that is completely secure with the SOC, and there are many other details in there. And that, as we have discussed as well, making the network such, going to the mindset where then we understand the network by itself can be a business for security. Yeah? Secure network as a service is out there and is possible. Now, the third thing I want to say is more on technical perspective, lots of technical innovation required. Look at network function virtualization. How do you do the proper segregation? How do you move the one mobile network function to other place, and taking care that its security credentials are fine all the time and comes up. And then also when we are going into IoT, some of the devices working on bits instead of several bytes. So how will you do the integrity, for example? What is the encryption, or what is the algorithm, crypto algorithm that should be used over there and for all these purposes? There's a whole set of technical points there that needs to be worked on as well. So I put down to 3, I guess.
Just about 3, but very good. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. I think with this panel, we could probably talk all afternoon, and it's certainly a big enough topic, but I hope that we've given you some food for thought. It was certainly scary seeing the number of people who hadn't heard of attacks like Stage Fright, I have to say. So food for thought for us all. But with that, I'd like to thank our panel and thank all of you. The tweets have been prolific, is probably the best word, and wish you a good rest of the conference. Thank you very much, gentlemen.